Welcome everybody to the first annual Oakies, where I recap all of my new gaming experiences from the year into a neat list, while also giving out some very special awards. This is something I initially tried to get out in December when it was still last year, but look, stuff got in the way. So it's coming out now. In the year of 2024, I finished 16 games I'd never finished before. And while I did replay a ton of old favourites, we're focusing on strictly new experiences for this list. Without another second to waste, let's get started with the first award on our list. Where there is a top, there is a bottom. Without holding too much hatred in my heart, let's give the worst game I finished award to number 16. KO the Kangaroo. Again, I repeat, I don't want to be too mean since I don't often complete games I hate, but something had to be at the bottom, and I'm sorry to say that it's pretty comfortably this game. I'm a fan of platformers. In fact, it's my favourite genre of game to play, but KO the Kangaroo felt as if anything good it had to offer was just derivative of something else. The art style is clearly taking heavy inspiration from Crash 4, and even my favourite part of the game, the various glove power-ups, don't really bring anything new to the table. It's clear that this was yet another attempt at reviving an old 90s icon, except they're using various cutouts of other people's blueprints. The dialogue is another point I'd like to bring up about this game.
No one saw? That was lucky. Wouldn't want that on RootTube.
It's clear that English is not the developer's first language. In fact, the game was made by Polish developers, and it's this fact that can result in some pretty funky delivery. But I will admit, there are a couple of funny lines that occur because of this as well. But apart from that, most of the levels are far too big, the game doesn't feel particularly polished despite the nationality of the developers, and while I do remain optimistic that they can give this series another go in the future, I do hope they try and bring some uniqueness that only KO can. The award for most potential goes to Grapple Dog. This game sat in my brother's eShop wishlist for quite some time, before I took a peek and was immediately drawn in by the thick-lined, vibrant art style. The game itself?
It's good. It's not the best.
It's a fairly standard platformer, a pretty one to look at, but obviously the main gimmick of this game is the namesake, the grapple. I don't think the game fully takes advantage of the physics-based speed that this thing can give you, as I felt like sometimes I'd become far too quick by accident when I'd rather feel like I have a lot more control over how the grapple moves me around. But overall, the levels are fun, the bosses are alright, and the music is absolutely banging. The only real gripe with that is that every world is only home to one track, so it does become a bit grating 4 levels in hearing the same track over and over. Now that it's been a while though, I'm able to listen to it without that worry, so I'm happy about that. Even if this game didn't reach what I'd describe as 2D platformer peak, I still think it lays quite the groundwork for an even better sequel. Foreshadowing anyone? The award for Best Parody goes to Arzette, the Jewel of Faramore. If you're someone who grew up in the early 2000s, played a lot of Zelda, and had essentially unlimited access to YouTube, then you're probably familiar with the Zelda CDI games, which, to put it lightly, were abominations that were created during the Nintendo and Philips collaboration. You know, the one that ended in the creation of their biggest rival, the PlayStation? Yeah. Good times. Well, give it a couple decades, and this fan-made send-up of those games not only strives to poke fun at the famously hilarious cutscenes those games have, but also try to be a good game in its own right, and I believe it mostly succeeds in that. At its core, it's a very simple linear level-based game that has you going around collecting things and beating bosses, but of course the main event are these goofy-ass MS Paint looking cutscenes, and I think by and large, they're all pretty funny. I'm also a big fan of games that revolve around getting new power-ups and returning to older levels to access new areas. Some would call that backtracking. I'd like to think of it as more like recycling, and we all know how good that is for the environment. The award for Best Remake of a Sequel goes to Mario vs. Donkey Kong. Not a lot of people know this, but not only is this game a remake of a GBA game, but that GBA game is technically the sequel to the GBA port of Donkey Kong, which is of course a remake of the original Donkey Kong game, the first appearance of both Mario and Donkey Kong himself. So does that make this technically Donkey Kong 2? Not that it really matters. I just wanted to bait and switch Silent Hill 2, because though I own it, I haven't quite gotten around to playing it yet. As for this game, at a slightly discounted price with some pretty solid puzzle design, with, I'll admit, pretty standard Mario graphics, this game became such an easy game to just chuck on and play when I was on the phone with friends or watching some YouTube. It never really bent my brain in terms of difficulty, but it was just hard enough that after giving certain levels some thought and seeing it all play out the way I wanted to, it did feel mighty satisfying. While the main story does remain quite easy, I think when you start getting into the plus levels and definitely the time trials, it can get quite a bit harder, but not too hard to require my undivided attention the whole time while playing. And I'm a big supporter in having games like that every now and again to break up the big cinematic adventures or the really tough experiences. The award for Best DLC goes to Bowser's Fury. I debated putting this on the list, as it's not really a DLC, but it certainly isn't a full game either. If Shadow of the Erdtree can be up for Game of the Year, then Bowser's Fury can be my favourite DLC of the year. I never owned a Wii U, so when the 3D World port came to Switch, I was more than excited to jump right in. After getting Odyssey, it seems everyone had warmed up to 3D World existing, as if it was no longer taking the space of an unreleased 3D Mario. And I gotta say, I'm just really glad to have both of them. But the main game I played when it released. It wasn't until this year that I finally got around to playing its additional campaign. You know, the one where Bowser gets really big and extra spiky. Bowser's Fury as a whole feels like you're playing through one of the various kingdoms from Odyssey, but with the 3D World control scheme. And gameplay wise, I don't think it gets much better than this. The platforming is fun, some of the final cat shines can get a bit tricky. My only real problem is that I'm a bit sick of the floating block, flat generic aesthetic Mario has. Especially since all of Bowser's Fury has basically the same theming for most of its areas. There is some snow and lava here and there, but you'll mostly be cruising around various beaches and coasts. I think the short length does help in this regard, as I don't think I could spend any more hours staring at the same areas over and over. But as a pure platforming experience, this was for sure a welcome addition to the Mario anthology. Now I'll just sit here, waiting for the next 3D Mario to come out. The award for most disappointing goes to The Plucky Squire. I do want to make it clear out of the gate that this award does not mean I thought this was a bad game. On the whole, I quite enjoyed it, but leading up to its release, I gotta be honest, I felt like I was being led to believe there was going to be a bit more to this game. I know, it's indie and my expectations should be in check, but I just thought they would do a bit more with the gameplay mechanics than what we saw in the trailers. The first chapter starts unbelievably strong, with your intro into the 3D world being a massive highlight, but once you start to gauge how linear the whole game is, everything starts to feel segmented in a bad way. Even one of the main mechanics of the game, these text boxes, do not evolve in a way that I would have expected. The puzzles start with you just kind of needing to swap the word to something else in the room, and by the end of the game, it's the same solutions, but you just need to travel a little further. One thing I do love is the art style of the book itself. James Turner, one of the heads of All Possible Futures, has a history in Pokemon design, so it's no surprise he exceeds in that aspect of the game. The 3D world, however, is a much different story. I don't know whether it's just the translation from 2D to 3D that irks me, but the entire style of the 3D world feels kind of ugly. Everything looks a bit like clay. I guess I was just hoping that they were going for a pseudo open world similar to a Zelda game, rather than an incredibly limiting chapter by chapter experience. There are still some standout moments, however. I think the story is quite strong, and there are some boss fights and special segments that did prove to be really fun and engaging. So while this game didn't reach my expectations, I still found myself having an alright time. Enough to say that I'm super excited to see what these guys do next. The award for Best Underrated Game goes to Grapple Dog's Cosmic Canines. If you were aware that Grapple Dog got a sequel this year, then you were probably expecting it on this list at some point, which must not be many of you since apparently this game sold pretty bad. That's unfortunately part of the story when it comes to the indie scene. If you can't rally together a large enough support system with the limited access to marketing and word of mouth, you're pretty much dead in the water, which is such a shame because this game is awesome. A solid step up from the original in all ways except that it still kind of chugs a bit frame rate wise. This was also the case for the original, but I'm not totally holding it against the game itself since I played it on the Switch, which is really starting to show its age. But yeah, pretty much everything about this game is much better than the first. The gunplay with Luna was awkward at first, with what buttons they chose to be shoot being a little too hard to press while moving, but I mostly got used to it, and I loved how most of the guns had a special mechanic beyond just being used to shoot. For Pablo as well, I had a lot of fun with all the elemental runes you could collect. They gave you all these special powers that sometimes felt absolutely broken. Like the fire ability, basically gives you full reign over the entire screen, which sure, may make things really easy, but at the very least it stayed consistently fun. The level variety has also been greatly improved, while also shuffling the themes around all the different worlds so you don't have to listen to the same track 6 times in a row anymore, which really allows you to appreciate another banging soundtrack. So if you're sitting here looking for a really good platformer to sink your teeth into, please think about giving Grapple Dogs 2 a try. Its creator deserves the success, and you all deserve the fun. The award for Best Game I Should Have Played 20 years ago goes to Banjo-Kazooie. From one platformer to another, I finally got around to playing and finishing an old classic. I owned an N64 as a kid, but the only Rareware games we had were Donkey Kong 64 and Diddy Kong Racing, so Banjo-Kazooie was the one that passed me by. Sure, I could have totally busted out an emulator and played it at any given time over the last couple decades, but it wasn't until it dropped on the NSO that I bought myself a nice N64 Pro controller that I decided to finally give it a go. Though it does suffer from a couple things that weren't all too rare in the late 90s when it came to platformers. I think Banjo controls fairly well, but there is a slippiness to him that made it hard to lock in and move around at breakneck speeds that you can eventually reach with something like Mario or Spyro. I felt like I always had to slow down and take my time even when things were fairly safe. Another problem I had was the health system, or rather how it interacted with the note system. You see, unlike gems in Spyro, the notes will respawn every time you revisit a level, and completing a level requires you to reach a note score of 100. The big issue is, every time you die, your note score is reset to 0, giving me some major Crash 1 box gem vibes. But at least in Crash, those levels are really short and are designed to be linear, whereas Banjo's levels can get pretty massive, and on your first time playing, you can easily spend more than an hour trying to figure out your way around some of the larger levels. And to have all of your progress wiped clean because you just eventually ran out of health, it's a pretty hard blow. I guess it also didn't help that NSO does have a rewind feature, staring me directly in the face, begging me to use it, but I kept telling it, no! Bad save states. Now that I've done it legitimately, however, my second playthrough, I'm going to be save stating it up hardcore. The award for worst menu navigation goes to Echoes of Wisdom. I like Echoes of Wisdom. I do, trust me. In the grand scheme of Zelda games though, it does fall slightly short. Every Zelda game that I've played I hold in high regard, but I think this one might be on the lower end of the spectrum. Once I play some of the more divisive titles, maybe that will change, but still, the fact remains. I am, however, very happy that Zelda team, specifically Grezzo, seems to be interested in trying new things out for the series. I'm more than certain the game sold well enough, so hopefully this means we can continue to get more experimental titles in between the big giant open world ones, because there is a ton of value in having both. But let's focus on one specific point for now. Why did they carry over the terrible menu management from Tears of the Kingdom? And why is it worse? Strictly speaking, it's exactly the same. One big line that can be changed to show most used, order you acquired, etc. But the thing is, once you got your favorite arrow tips on the top of your menu in Tears, it was never really that bad to grab things out in the heat of battle. Clumsy, sure, but most of the time the things you needed were right at the top. In Echoes, the entire game is centered around the over 100 echoes that you need to be shuffling around with on the fly the entire game. Too many times I'd need to scroll through far too much of the menu to access a specific echo I needed for a specific puzzle. When it came to the monster echoes, I usually just stuck to a few favorites, but with everything else, sorting through it was kind of a nightmare. And speaking of monster echoes, I feel like there was maybe a little bit too much emphasis put on them, rather than the way more inventive object echoes you get to use. On the whole though, the dungeon design was good, the bosses were pretty good, the story was a nice change of pace, especially getting to finally play as Zelda. It was a mostly solid attempt at a new Zelda experience that I hope they attempt to polish as they release more games, even if this particular one just fell short of what I expected. The award for Best Vibes goes to Grand Theft Auto Vice City. I know what you're thinking. Since this is higher than Banjo-Kazooie, shouldn't this game get the Best Game I Should Have Played 20 years ago award? And I'd say excellent point. Let's go back in time and give the 5-year-old a copy of the Killing Pedestrian Simulator. Some of you are going to tell me how epic your childhood was that you got to play these games, but let's be real. Back then, platformers were way more in my wheelhouse. But one thing that this game did succeed in is sucking me into its environment, in such a way that I honestly think Vice City may be my favorite Grand Theft Auto city, if we're ranking them purely on vibes. Which is an odd thing, sure, but hear me out. Liberty City has always felt like the typical generic New York-esque city that we see far too much of in games and movies. In a similar vein, San Andreas in the inner Los Santos area sometimes feels a bit big for the sake of being big. And don't get me wrong, the map is incredible, but I gotta say, I'm really excited for what Rockstar does for Vice City and GTA 6, because in 2002, they were already cooking with this city. The lights, the trees, the soundtrack, it's clear they took extra care in making it all feel like you could jump into the TV screen and start living it up in 80s Florida. And even though it can be assumed that GTA 6 will be set in modern day, I do still hope we have elements, however fading, of that classic neon feel the original had. Beyond vibes, the game itself is another solid Grand Theft Auto experience, quite a step up from 3, especially now that our main character actually has a voice, which gives us some far more entertaining cutscenes where Tommy is able to have some hilarious back and forth with all the colourful inhabitants, rather than staring them dead in the face as they try and give you their best stand-up. They also dipped their toes into more in-depth side content, like owning and operating various businesses, which I have to admit were pretty fun, even if the missions themselves weren't too deep. I look forward to getting into San Andreas this year as I continue my journey through the games before the next one is unleashed upon the world. The award for best finale goes to Super Mario Bros. Wonder. While I did play some of this when it released back in October of 2023, the bulk of it I finished at the start of 2024, and while this may be a hot take, I'll say it anyway. I think this is the best 2D Mario, outright. Now, should I actually finish some of the older games before making this claim? Sure, but I'm making it anyway, and you're free to check back with me to see whether I still believe this after beating every other 2D Mario. The style, level design, almost everything this game has to offer is at its peak, especially its final world. Mario games aren't the hardest, and that's okay, they're for all ages, but the last world does take quite the step up in difficulty. Nothing insane, but it's noticeable and appreciated. But the last 2 levels, oh my god, they're incredible. It has truly been a while since I've had my Mario platforming skills tested like this. The last level in particular forces you to play with all the badges one after the other, meaning the design of the level no longer has to account for you choosing your own badge. So it's honestly no surprise it's designed so tightly. It was very hard and at times bordering on feeling unfair, but learning the rhythm and tons of trial and error, it's incredibly cathartic to finish. Except for the last part where I legitimately had to put tape on the Switch screen so I could keep tabs on where Mario was at all times. I think my biggest gripe with Wonder is that I'm not really a fan of the soundtrack. I don't remember there being any big stinkers, but I honestly don't have any standouts that come to mind either, which is really strange for a franchise that usually knocks their soundtracks out of the park every time. Best I can say about this game's music is that it's serviceable, but the game itself, especially its finale, masterful. The award for Best Zelda Game goes to
Resident Evil.
I played quite a few games this year that can be described as Zelda or Zelda adjacent games, and while you may believe it to be heresy to refer to a Resident Evil game as such, it's all that was going through my mind when crawling the halls of the Spencer Mansion. The entire game is like one big Zelda dungeon, with an emphasis on survival horror instead of combat. Even some of the puzzles feel very in line with what you would see in those games. As you can tell, I played the 2002 remake that was ported to the PS4 over a decade later, and I think this game holds up amazingly. They do give you the option of using the original tank controls as well as the new analog controls. They both interact with the fixed camera differently, and while it can sometimes be a bit hard to get used to how to adjust your thumbs when the camera angle changes, nothing in the game requires too much precision in that regard, so there is a little wiggle room to screw up here and there. Because of the way the game asks you to set difficulty, I accidentally went in as Chris on very easy difficulty, and you know, I could definitely tell. Luckily, since this game has 2 playable protagonists with subtle changes in each playthrough, I had no issue going straight into another playthrough as Jill on normal difficulty directly after. There was something so addictive with trying to remember what I was supposed to do from the first playthrough and trying to do it more efficiently than last time, while also accounting for the change in main character. One thing I gotta say I loved about Jill is that she had 2 extra inventory spaces, which I don't even think I took advantage of too much since I already knew what items I had to have on me at any given time, which kind of makes me think that even though I was on very easy with Chris, dealing with only 6 inventory spaces almost split the difference anyway, since I was constantly carting around items I wouldn't need for ages since I didn't know yet. At the time of writing this, I'm in the middle of playing Resident Evil 2, so you'll be seeing that on next year's list for sure, but for now, I think it's safe to call me a certified fan of the series. The award for most gameplay styles goes to Dave the Diver. Right now I just gotta go ham into explaining how much I adore this game. Dave the Diver is a game that has you going into the ocean to catch fish by day, then serving in your sushi restaurant by night. Though those are the 2 core gameplay mechanics, there is so much more that this game throws at you as the story progresses. And while with most games I'd certainly caution at the amount of gameplay styles they attempt, Dave the Diver mostly delivers on all of them. Sometimes completely new styles will show up for a single segment and then never again. It made the whole game really unpredictable and kept the experience fresh the entire way through. But of course, the bread and butter of this game is the diving and the dishing, and those 2 parts are pretty damn polished. It's almost like a lot of those mobile games that have you managing hotels or airports or whatever, except instead of forcing you to wait actual real life hours for things to happen, the game just continues. Who would have thought that that would make for a much better gameplay loop? The look of the game is also gorgeous. They mix 2D sprite work and 3D models, actually texturing the models with pixels to help them fit in seamlessly with everything else. It's a bold strategy to mix such styles, as we already saw in this list, but this title absolutely perfects it. I couldn't wait to do a full in-depth review on this game, but I may wait a little while longer. The Game Awards announced a new DLC pack that's set to release towards the end of the year, so I think I'll wait until I get to play that until I start working on that video. Until then, you should play this game, especially for its price tag at $30. The award for Best Nostalgia Bait goes to Astrobot. The bronze for 2024 goes to that same year's Game of the Year, at least according to these guys. And clearly, being me, you guys would rightfully assume it would make it pretty far up on my list. I'm even in the middle of writing an Astrobot review right now. But running the risk of repeating myself, I'll just say that Astrobot is an almost flawless game from a technical standpoint. I could stand to see a slightly more difficult adventure, as well as a little bit more of a unique style other than robots plus PlayStation IP. But in virtually every other category, this game borders perfection. Most of the music tracks are total upbeat bops. The levels and powers are constantly reinventing themselves and always strive to keep things fresh, to the point where I could have totally used a few more levels with some of the powers that you only get to use once or twice. Seeing all the references to past franchises that have had strong ties to PlayStation is obviously a point of contention with players, some choosing to look at it a little more pessimistically. But from my perspective, Team Misobi is not trying to sell you on some other game or product. These guys are proud to be part of the PlayStation family and are just trying to bask in its thick and rich history, even if those positive feelings do feel like they're cheating a bit. But once again, they do have a pretty good game to back it all up. The success this game saw has me begging for more money to be flowed into projects like this. Platforming games were the very roots of early PlayStation, and to live in a world where it's only Mario making the big AAA platformers, I mean, it starts to feel a bit stark. Odyssey was 8 years ago, so to see another come in and knock it out of the park so well is a great thing to see. Now hopefully in Astrobot 2, we can move slightly away from the PlayStation memorabilia and establish a more independent vision. The award for Best Well-type game goes to Animal Well. I've been a fan of Video Game Donkey for years, and while my gaming opinions don't perfectly align with his, I mean, when does it with anyone, I would in a general sense trust him when he starts to talk genuinely about a game he's passionate about. So when he started Big Mode and acquired the publishing rights for Animal Well, it immediately popped into my radar. The trailers were purposefully vague about what we were getting ourselves into, but what I did know is that it was partially survival horror, and it looked gorgeous. So I was excited, but I had no clue how much I would love this game. Playing it alongside my brother, uncovering secrets together, piecing clues we had picked up along our travels of the well, and finally diving into the online forums to talk about the game to help us with those last few secrets that were maybe a bit too much for one person to figure out. The whole experience was awesome. Getting all these kids' toys and using them as your key items was also so ingenious, and discovering where to use them in already discovered areas of the well had me uncovering parts of the map I didn't even think there was anything to uncover. This map though, this needs fixing. I read somewhere that initially developer Billy Basso wasn't even going to include a map, and while I do prefer to have one than not, if he ever works on a game with a map in the future, I hope he tries to make it a little more readable than this one. If you still haven't picked this game up and are at least a little bit curious of it, I would recommend just taking the dive and getting it. It's a cheap purchase, so it's not much of a commitment if you don't end up liking it, but I guarantee there are going to be enough people that fall in love with it that a recommendation feels worth it. Finally, my number one. If you've been watching me for a bit now, I've already spoiled what my number one is, so I'll just get right into it. The gold medal, first place, the Oakies Supreme. My game of the year is Balatro. This game, it's incredible. Naysayers be gone, this game deserves every bit of praise it gets and every bit of playtime I give it. And given its nature, that'll essentially be until the end of time. We essentially watched someone invent chess 2 right in front of our very eyes. And sure, that may be a funny comparison to make, but the combination of accessible entry point and complex endgame strategies cannot be something that's easy to design. Even Astrobot struggled at that, choosing to remain fairly easy for a more cohesive experience. But Balatro can do it both. It can do it all, using a foundation that I'd say more than a few people know in poker, and building on it with wacky and interesting ways that players can simply learn as they go and add it to their knowledge pile. I don't believe it ever becomes overwhelming, unless of course you don't at least give yourself a little time to internalize the rules. Balatro will still be as good 30 years from now as it is right now. Local Thunk has already toyed with us on the idea of a content update, and while at the time of writing this we have no idea what it is, I can only assume it'll just add to the abundant amount of things we can do in the base game. Honestly, if I can wish for anything, it would be for more challenges in the challenge mode. There is so much potential for weird challenges with varying different rule sets, even if we at some point get to custom build different challenges. I mean, PC players are already well into doing that on their own, but something official for console players would be nice too. I don't even know if there's much more to say. The game is hella addictive, it feels so good to build and cultivate a strategy round after round, and watching it reward you with one-hand wins in Ante 8, yeah, this is it, man. And that's it for 2024. Again, I did a video on this one if you want to see me talk about Balatro for over 20 minutes. And if I ever do any more deep dives on any other games on this list, I'll try and remember to add them to the list when I upload them. So there you have it, my 2024 gaming log in a nutshell. I have plenty of old and new games I'm excited for in 2025, but if you have any suggestions for what games I must play this year, please leave them down in the comments below. I'll be sure to skim them and add them to my ever-growing backlog of unplayed titles. But I promise, I'm slowly becoming better at getting through it. Cheers to an incredible year of games, and I hope you'll join me for the next Oakies in roughly 1 year's time. And thanks for watching DaAcorn.